You can't keep getting away with this! He can't keep getting away with it!
Alright, so it's the morning after UFC 305, and as you're probably already aware, Dricus Du Plessis just continued his undefeated UFC streak in order to successfully defend his title for the first time against Israel Adesanya. Before I talk about how this guy just keeps finding ways to win against fighters that are so much more technically proficient than him, I first want to talk about last night's fight itself, because DDP is the first guy to ever submit Israel Adesanya, and in a high-profile title fight no less. First round was a pretty close round that was entirely striking, and even though I personally scored it for DDP, I'm not confident about it at all, and for those who scored it for Izzy, I totally get why you think so. Regardless of who you think won this round, I think we can all agree how much more effective DDP's striking was compared to Izzy. Sure, Izzy ate DDP up with his jab, but DDP's body kicks are severely underrated, and I think the kicks from Dricus edged out this round for him, at least in my opinion. I also scored the second round for DDP, and even though Izzy showed some really good wrestling and grappling defense throughout this round, I think DDP's relentlessness with his wrestling while also landing punches while he had Izzy defending takedowns was a really smart game plan from him and his team. The thing is though, Izzy might have actually scored a knockdown on DDP at the exact moment that DDP lunged forward to shoot a takedown, but the sequence looked so ambiguous that it's kind of impossible to be sure if Izzy knocked DDP down or if it was just DDP's forward momentum getting halted while he was throwing his body forward. Regardless, this wasn't considered a knockdown based on the official stats of the fight, but it really could have been in actuality. In spite of that, I still give this round to DDP because he was able to land takedowns and shots and keep Izzy guessing. Third round, I definitely scored to Izzy. He was definitely just a step ahead of DDP in this round, and he was really able to get DDP to overcommit to shots, and Izzy landed some really classic Adesanya counters to both the head and the body. DDP landed some nice shots of his own in this one, but it just wasn't enough, and for the most part, he was just outskilled and outplayed in this round. Up to this point in the fight, I had it 2-1 in favor of DDP, but I was really interested to see if Izzy could keep the momentum going. But as we all know by now, DDP was able to clutch up in the fourth round and seal the deal. This round only lasted for about a minute and a half, and even though both guys were going at each other for the first 45 seconds, it really seemed like Izzy just started to get overwhelmed by how awkward DDP fights, and after Izzy got caught with a super awkward lunging hook, he got stunned against the cage. DDP did not let up the pressure at all, and even though Izzy pointed to the ground to try and make it seem like he was willing to stand still and exchange, it was obviously a bluff because DDP charged him with another flurry where all Izzy could do was try to run away because he got rocked by DDP's huge shots. Izzy even tried to turn his back and hide from DDP's flurry where DDP turned that into a takedown and immediately got both hooks in. A couple seconds later after that, DDP has the full rear naked choke locked in, and for the first time in Izzy's entire career, he taps out due to submission. Crazy. Man, I don't know, bro. This DDP guy is really something else, because even though he fights like a drunken sailor from 1904, he continues to find ways to beat fighters who, on paper, are so much more skilled and polished than he is. Like, sure, it's probably no surprise to anyone that DDP was going to mix in a lot of wrestling into his game plan. That's just what he does. But the fact that DDP really went toe-to-toe with Izzy on the feet and gave him a whole ton of problems while doing so was really surprising and impressive to me. Like, DDP, despite all of his offensive and defensive flaws that he shows in literally all of his fights, is way too good at finding ways to pull out the win. DDP is slow, he's awkward, and he's really sloppy, but he's proven time and time again that what he does is ridiculously effective, and through that, he's now defended his belt against one of the greatest middleweight fighters of the modern UFC era. I mean, even going back to his last fight against Sean Strickland, which before I go any further, I personally scored that fight for Sean, it was still a really close fight, and I wasn't surprised that the judges gave it to DDP in that one. I still found myself being really impressed by how effective DDP's style was against someone as clean and polished as Sean. Like, DDP did not let himself get deterred by how accurate and precise Sean's jab was, and he was even able to get Sean backpedaling in that fight, which was for sure not Sean's MO as a fighter. And again, DDP's constant forward pressure and lack of respect for his opponent's best weapons forces fighters to fight uncomfortably, and as a result his opponents look worse fighting DDP than when they fight more conventional opponents. And again, I personally scored that fight for Sean that night, but it wasn't a robbery in the slightest in my opinion, and DDP, for all that he lacks as a fighter, is a master at imposing his will and his game plans. In fact, I think that the fact that DDP is so committed and dedicated to his game plans is the best quality about DDP's fighting. You can tell that for DDP, he doesn't care if the fight gets tough or if he gets put into unfavorable positions. He doesn't ever let himself get rattled or discouraged in his fights and just keeps working the strategy that he and his team formulate during the training camp. And in the case of his fight with Sean, even though he was never able to build up any sort of momentum, he was able to stay scrappy, and through that, Sean was never able to get settled into the fight, which is absolutely when Sean is most dangerous. Let's also take a look at DDP's fight against Robert Whittaker. DDP and his team were well aware of Robert's blitz-heavy style, and they knew that they couldn't give Robert space to get caught at the end of his long combinations. DDP stayed in his face the entire time, and when Rob blitzed in, DDP would either use that crashing sequence to force the clinch with Rob, and through DDP's chimpanzee strength, he was able to take Rob down to the ground with it. Then in the second round, once DDP had a better feeling for when Rob was going to charge forward, instead of covering up and clinching, DDP just timed a really sneaky right-hand jab from southpaw that dropped Whittaker, and that was the beginning of the end of the fight. And again, Rob, much like Sean and Izzy, is a much more conventionally sound striker and just overall better fighter than DDP is, yet DDP and his team are always so well prepared for what their opponents bring to the table that they come in with tricks and plays to make their opponent's strengths work against them. So just looking back at his 3 last fights, DDP has now submitted Israel Adesanya for the first time ever, forced Sean Strickland to fight on the back foot, and knocked down and TKO'd Robert Whittaker. Again, for all the things that DDP clearly does wrong when it comes to the quote-unquote rules of MMA, he's so resourceful and entrusting in his team's preparation that he wins fights that on paper alone he really shouldn't be winning. Like, for real, this guy fights like he's mastered the drunk uncle at a family barbecue fighting style, and it's gotten him to where he is now, successfully defending his middleweight title against a UFC legend and future Hall of Famer. And look, man, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I knew that I've been seeing DDP's championship level quality since the beginning or whatever, because the reality of the situation is, I think I've picked DDP to win in his fights in 1 or maybe 2 of them. Like, I felt pretty sure he was going to beat Darren Till, and I was kind of 50-50 on if he would make it past Derek Brunson, but you can bet your ass that I picked Robert, Sean, and Izzy to expose DDP's shortcomings and get the win over him. DDP is going toe-to-toe with some of the best strikers the middleweight division has ever seen, and his sheer strength and size enable him to complete takedown attempts that really shouldn't work. Like, I have seen better wrestling technique when I was on my high school wrestling team, yet here DDP is taking down elite MMA fighters. All this to say, none of this makes sense to me, but it's more than obvious that what he's doing is working. You know what, man? This is still why I fully love the sport of UFC/MMA all these years since I first started watching the sport in 2008. The moment I think that I start understanding the game, and when I start seeing myself as someone with some knowledge of the sport, someone like DDP comes along that makes me realize that there's so much more nuance and ambiguity to the fight game that humbles me and teaches me to just enjoy the fights and revel in the action that's being put on display. At the end of the day, I have no fucking clue how long DDP is going to hold on to the belt, because at this point, I can totally see DDP getting beaten in his very next fight, but on the other hand, the guy just continues to find ways to win, and he might hold on to his belt for a very, very long time based on the back of his discipline to his game plans and his in-fight resourcefulness. DDP is a goofy, sloppy, unpolished, drunken sailor of a fighter, but the guy just knows how to win fights, and goddamn do I respect him for what he's accomplished in his last 3 fights. He has made me eat my words at almost every single twist and turn that he's had in his career, and I can't speak for anybody else, but at this point, I'm just here to enjoy the ride now. So with all of this being said, congratulations, champ. I don't know what you're doing out there, but you're obviously doing something right. And honestly, I can't wait to see how the rest of his title defenses go, win, lose, or draw. Alright, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know your thoughts on all things DDP. Has he earned your respect as a true middleweight champion, or do you think it's only a matter of time before his fighting abilities get exposed? As always, if you liked the video, then like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.